Shalom, everybody. It's Shabbat. It's 3 o'clock, which means it's time for the Shema. So today, as we normally do, we've been doing the Shema together at 3 o'clock. And if you can, join us with that. So it's always good to bless the Father. It's always good to make a declaration of our faith and the hope and the things that we have a heart for, and we have a heart to keep Yah's ways in front of us, and to follow Him all of our days. And so today, I think it's a good idea to start with the declaration that He is the one true God. He is the one that we serve, and we honor Him and Him alone. Okay, so I'm going to get that here. Let's pull that up. And let's start with the Shema. Of course, we know it's from Deuteronomy 6. That's where we start off at. So we'll do the transliteration for the Hebrew first. Join with me. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, b'chol levavcha, u'v'chol nafshecha, u'v'chol mo'odecha. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Yeshua Hu HaMashiach, Hu HaSar Shalom, Hu Adon HaKol. Amen. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Blessed be His glorious sovereign name forever and ever. Yeshua is the Messiah. He is the Prince of Peace, and He is Lord of all. Amen. In the blessing for Shabbat, Baruch atah Adonai Makodesh HaShabbat. Blessed are you, O Lord, who hallows the Shabbat. Amen. And then, blessing for salvation in Yeshua. I love this one, guys. It's the Hebrew is as follows. Baruch atah Yahweh Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu et derech ha-Yeshua b'Mashiach Yeshua Baruch Hu. Amen. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who gave to us the way of salvation through the Messiah Yeshua. Blessed be He. Amen. So blessing for the sons and daughters and the men and the women of the assembly. Guys, even though we cannot gather face to face here right now, we can still pray for one another, and we can still bless one another. So let's do that. Remember, the praying for the children, all the sons and daughters, age is pretty irrelevant in that, just all the sons and daughters. And then for the men and the women of the assembly, remember, it's not just a prayer for husbands and wives. It's a prayer for men and women. So between this, we're blessing the whole family. You know, we're blessing all the people in our midst. So no one is excluded here. Okay, so let's start with the children. The blessing is Yisimcha Elohim Ephraim v'chi Manasseh. May God make you a symbol of blessing like Ephraim and Manasseh. And take a moment to pray for your sons. And then the prayer for the daughters, Yisamech Elohim Kasara Rivka Rachel v'Leah. May God make you a symbol of blessing as Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. And prayer blessing for the ladies from Proverbs 31, starting in verse 10. So who can find a woman of virtue? For her value is far above jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, so he has no lack of gain. She deals good with him and not evil all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax, and she works with her hands with delight. She is like the merchant ships. She brings in her food from afar. She also rises while it is still night and gives game to her household and a portion to her maidens. She has examined a field and takes it, and she plants a vineyard from the fruit of her hands. She has girded her loins with strength and has made her arms strong. She tastes whether her gain is good, and her lamp is not put out by night. She has sent forth her hands unto the staff, and her hands have held the spindle. She spreads out her hands to the poor, yea, she stretches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She makes herself ornamental coverings, and her clothing is bleached linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits with the elders of the land. She makes fine linen garments and sells and delivers girdles to the merchant. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she shall rejoice at the day to come. She opens her mouth in wisdom, and the law of kindness is on her tongue. She watches the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed, and her husband also, for he praises her. For many are the daughters who act with virtue, but you rise above them all. Grace may be deceitful and beauty vain, but a woman who fears Yahweh, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. Take a moment and pray for the ladies. All right, the prayer for the men of the assembly. Happy is the man that has not walked in the counsel of the wicked, nor stood in the way of sinners, nor sat in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by streams of water, that brings forth its fruit in its season, and whose leaf does not wither, and in whatsoever he does he shall prosper. Not so the wicked, but they are like the chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord regards the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked shall perish. Take a moment and pray for the men of the assembly. All right, a couple scripture readings before we get on and get started. Psalm 95, 1 through 11. Come, let's sing to Adonai. Let's shout for joy to the rock of our salvation. Let's come into his presence with thanksgiving. Let's shout for joy to him with songs of praise. For Adonai is a great God, a great king, greater than all gods. He holds the depths of the earth in his hands, and the mountain peaks too belong to him. The sea is his, he made it, and his hands shaped the dry land. Come, let's bow down and worship. Let's kneel before Adonai who made us. For he is our God, and we are the people in his pasture, the sheep in his care. If only today you would listen to his voice. Don't harden your heart as you did at Meribah, as you did on the day of Massah in the desert. When your fathers put me to the test, they challenged me even though they saw my work. For 40 years I loathed that generation. I said, this is a people whose hearts go astray. They don't understand how I do things. Therefore, I swore in my anger that they would not enter my rest. Isaiah 58:12. You will rebuild the ancient ruins, raise foundations from ages past, and be called repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets to live in. So if you hold back your foot on Shabbat from pursuing your own interests on my holy day, if you call Shabbat a delight, Adonai's holy day worth honoring, then honor it by not doing your usual things or pursuing your interests or speaking about them. If you do, you will find delight in Adonai, and I will make you ride on the heights of the land and feed you with the heritage of your ancestor Yaakov, for the mouth of Adonai has spoken. Scripture on joy, Psalm 1:2. Instead, they find joy in obeying the law of the Lord, and they study it day and night. Clap your hands for joy, all people. Praise God with loud songs. God goes up to his throne, and there are shouts of joy and the blast of trumpet as the Lord goes up. Psalm 98:4. Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Burst into jubilant song with music. And then that leads us to counting the Omer. So what season are we in, guys? The time between Pesach and the Feast of Unleavened Bread and First Fruits. We count 50 days to Shavuot, which is also Pentecost, what has been called Pentecost. So we count the 50 days to Shavuot, and so each day there was an offering presented to Yah. It was an Omer, the sheaf for the waving, nodding back to first fruits, right? So the blessing is as follows for the counting of the Omer, the counting the days we are in. A couple scriptures regarding Leviticus 23:15 and 16 says, from the day after the day of rest, that is, from the day you bring the sheaf for waving, you are to count 7 full weeks. Until the day after the 7th week, you are to count 50 days. Then you are to present a new grain offering to Adonai. Deuteronomy 16, verses 16 and 17. 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before the Lord your God at the place that he will choose. at the feast of unleavened bread, at the feast of weeks, and the feast of booths. And they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. For every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God that he has given you. The blessing for counting the Omer. Baruch atah Yahweh Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshenu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat ha'omer. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us concerning the counting of the Omer. Today is day 7 of the Omer, which is 1 week and no additional days of the Omer. Day 8 is at sundown, which means for day 8, it would be this is 1 week and 1 day. Okay, so with that, we say Shabbat Shalom, everyone. And this has been an awesome time that we're just going back in to seek the heart of the Father here. And let me get the teaching set up here for us. So we've got a few things to get into today. And we're going to talk about, continuing this week's Parsha, okay, we're going to continue to talk about approaching Yahweh, but in relationship to what happened with Nadav and Avihu. You know, they approach bringing strange fire before the Lord. But we're not going to go back into that today because we covered that in our Torah portion on Tuesday. You can go back and find that on our YouTube channel, Vimeo channel. You can go back and look at those again. But kind of continuing in that, there's something as a result of that Yahweh gave as warnings. It's kind of like, so the 8th day of service, the priesthood was inaugurated, they were consecrated, they were ordained, if you will, and they were put into place and put into position. So now they're working in this. And then Nadav and Avihu tend to take matters into their own hands and work outside of the framework of what Yah had established for them. Then we kind of get this break in the middle of all this. After they died, God starts to talk to Aaron about food. Weird place to put that, you know? But in the context of the book itself, it really fits. Because remember, Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, talks about holiness and things that are holy. He is a holy God. You are a holy people. And this is how you approach. So what Yahweh is saying, that he is holy, and he's reminding Aaron that when you approach me, you are to be a holy people, and there are ways things need to be done. And for you to be a holy people, you are not to defile yourself, or sometimes our own thoughts get away from us and we can bring defilement in ourselves because of that. You know, we want to do certain things certain ways, and Yahweh says, you don't worship me the way that the other nations worship their gods. So we have to learn how to approach a holy God and what that means. Now, notice I'm not talking about being redeemed here. And I'm not talking about trying to work a way into salvation here. I'm not talking about any of that, because we've got to remember, when Yahweh pulled his people out of Egypt, he said that was a matter of redemption. He brought them to the mountain so they could confirm the covenant that he wanted to enter into them with. Then he gave them these words to show them paths of life and paths of blessing for them to walk in. What I'm saying is this. He did not give the Torah or how he desired for them to walk as a holy people to try to earn or merit anything from him. He gave the Torah and how to walk as a holy people, instructions for life and living, to a people who were already called out and redeemed. So how do we handle that? See, so it's not a matter of we're trying to pursue these things to gain something from God. No, we are doing this because he said he sanctifies us. He said he makes us holy. And if he makes us holy and he sanctifies us and he sets us apart, then he is the one who can also tell us what defiles. And so he has the right to tell us how to approach and how to live and how to conduct our affairs. So all of this falls in line with it, okay? So let's get into a few things here. We're going to talk about approaching Yah, holiness, discernment, and food. Yeah, I put that in there because it seems kind of out of place, right? You know, when we said Yahweh is holy and he needs to approach that. So when we talk about holiness, how many people, the first thing you think about is food? And when you talk about you are a holy people, it really doesn't seem to be the top of the list. I mean, we talk about being set apart. We think about prayer. We think about lifestyle. We think about reading the word. We think about acts of kindness toward one another, all that. But not that often is food in that like top 3 list of when we say, hey, when I say holy, what do you think? Now, keep in mind what I just said about a minute ago. This is not an issue of being redeemed or being born again. This is an issue of walking as a holy people and what's defined in that. Okay, because again, keep it in context of how this is being given. It's not like all of a sudden out of nowhere, God in Leviticus chapter 11 says, oh, wait a minute, let me backtrack and tell you about something that I may have forgotten before. No. So he's talking about a people who are set aside, his, called out, redeemed. Now I have called you holy. I have made you so. I have consecrated you. This is how I desire for you to walk, so you do not bring defilement in your midst. Okay, that's the things we need to consider and to think about. All right, so let's get on to this. Yahweh is holy. As such, he is to be approached on his terms. Now, Israel had been accepted, right? I mean, here they placed the korban and they were received. I mean, the offerings were received, and this is good, right? But right out of the midst of that, Nadav and Abihu tries to bring strange fire before the Lord, and that was not received. Okay, so what we learn from that, it's not just about the offering, it's also about the heart with which the offering is brought. Okay, now sometimes we can get so excited about something that we don't pay attention to how something should be done. You know, we get so excited that we forget there are steps before things have to happen. It's like if we go and let's say we want to go and ride a roller coaster. We get so excited about being on the roller coaster that we forget to bring the bar down and to fasten the belt and to put the harness on. We're so excited about being in the coaster. Let's go. And it does a loop and you fall out. Well, there's a few steps you missed because you were so excited you didn't pay any attention to protocol. You didn't pay any attention to how things were supposed to be done. Another good example is you get a child who's excited about something. They want to take off running down the road. They don't pay any attention to what's going on around them. If someone's riding a bike or if there's a car coming down the street or anything going on, they're just excited and they're just running. Guys, sometimes we can do the same thing. We get so excited about some things that we completely forget about protocol. We completely forget about how things were supposed to be done. So the point I have here is zeal is good, but if zeal takes you against the word of Yahweh, it is not righteous. Okay? Remember Hebrews 12:28. Since we have received an unshakable kingdom, let us have grace through which we may offer service that will please God with reverence and fear. Indeed, our God is a consuming fire. Remember, he says that let us offer a service that pleases God. See, a lot of times we think we want to worship God like this because it makes me feel good. So then who are you really worshiping? You know, and I'm not saying that when you worship Yah that you don't, or that you're not supposed to feel good, because, you know, you do. But if that's the point, if we're learning to approach Yah a certain way because it makes us feel good, then we need to be careful that we're not really setting ourselves up an idol. We need to learn what he said he desires. You know, it's like as we find what he finds pleasurable, then he will pour blessing upon us as well. Okay, so to enter into the presence of Yahweh, we have to have atonement. And we've talked about that. We're not Nadav and Abihu atoned for. They were atoned for up to the boundary of their service. They stepped outside of their boundary that they were anointed for service for. Again, just things to keep note of. There's danger there because when we say, well, someone is anointed for something, we think they have like free reign to do whatever they want. No, if someone was anointed in the scripture, it was for a specific purpose and for a specific cause. There was a meaning to their anointing. There was a purpose that was established there. Okay? All right. Hebrews 10:26 says, for if we deliberately continue to sin after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sin. So what we've got here is Nadav and Abihu. They tried to approach Yah. They did no better. Because remember, they had just finished the 7 days of being set aside. This was the 8th day of their consecration, their first day of actual service. And they had just been taught and instructed for 7 days on what they were supposed to do. So who was authorized to bring incense? Aaron was. And not just the person that was authorized to do it, but the type of incense it was and where he was supposed to get the fire, everything about it. Okay? So we've got to pay attention to how Yahweh does it. So fire came out from before the Lord, and it consumed Nadav and Abihu. So Leviticus 10:3. So Moshe says to Aaron, this is what Adonai said, through those who are near me, I will be consecrated, and before all the people I will be glorified. And Aaron kept silent. So what we're looking at is this. Through those who come near to me, I will be holy and consecrated. Or it can also read, in order to come near to me, I must be seen as holy and consecrated, and before all the people will be glorified. What God is saying is that the people who represent us to him and him to us need to be a holy people, people that are set apart. There has to be a higher standard on those that have responsibility in drawing close to the holy things. And everything must be done proper and in order. Because if it's just done however and whenever and I mean anything, whatever goes, he's not going to be seen that God is holy. And we must remember God is holy. And if you are to be a holy people, then there's a protocol here. There's a protocol of the kingdom that we have to pay attention to. Ezekiel 36:23 through 27 says this. I will set apart my great name to be regarded as holy, since it has been profaned in the nations. You profaned it among them. And the nations will know that I am Adonai, says Adonai Elohim, when before their eyes I am set apart through you to be regarded as holy. For I will take you from among the nations, gather you from all the countries, and return you to your own soil. Then I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. And I will cleanse you from all your uncleanness and from all your idols. And I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit inside of you. And I will take the stony heart out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit inside you and cause you to what? Live by my laws, respect my rulings, and obey them. What we find is that if we are a people redeemed, if we say we walk by his spirit, then according to what Ezekiel is saying, God is telling us when he draws us out of our uncleanness, draws us out of our idolatry, he washes us clean, he gives us a new heart, which is his heart. He gives us a new spirit, which is his spirit. And he puts this within us to a goal, to an end. There's a purpose. What is that purpose? That we walk and live according to his word. See, we cannot say that we are a holy people and God is equipping us by his Holy Spirit to walk contrary to his word. See, it doesn't work that way. If God is equipping you with his Holy Spirit, his Ruach HaKodesh, then he is equipping you to walk in accordance with his word in his ways. Okay? All right. So we need to worship how? In spirit and in truth. Psalm 119, 142 says, your righteousness is forever, and your law, your Torah, is truth. If we worship in spirit and truth, what is truth? Okay, now there's a lot of things that are true. There's a lot of things that we can talk about and can be considered aspects of truth. But there's only one actual truth, and that is the word of the living God. Okay, so again, so what is true? His word is true. Not just true, but absolute truth. Psalm 119, 151. So you are nigh, O Lord, and all your commandments are truth. Proverbs 3:3. Let not mercy and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck and write them on the table of your heart. Wow, so that's good stuff, right? Now, with that, we got to keep in mind, as a people of God and being set apart, we thank God for his grace and his mercy because, we need it every day, right? Absolutely. But when judgment happens, where is it going to start? And we see judgment is going to start within the confines of the people of Yah, within the house of God, so to speak, right? It's going to start among his people first. Why? Think Nadav and Avihu. When Nadav and Avihu breached the holy things and broke protocol, did God send a fire out in the midst of all Israel, or did he send it out in the midst of the holy? He sent it out in the midst of the holy. Those that are closest, those bearing the responsibility for these things, will be entering the judgment first. Okay? So a couple scriptures to look at. Where does judgment start? 1 Peter 4:17. For the time has come for judgment to begin where? At the house of God. And if it begin first at us, what shall be the end of them that obey not the gospel of God? Ezekiel 9, 4 through 6. So, and Yahweh says, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Yerushalayim, and set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and that cry for all the abominations done in the midst thereof. And to the others he said in my hearing, go after him through the city and smite, and let not your eye spare nor have pity. Slay utterly old and young, both maids and little children and women. But come not near any man in whom is the mark, and begin where? Begin at the sanctuary. And then they began with the ancient men which were before the house. So again, what we're talking is when judgment happens, it's going to start with the people of God first. That's sobering, isn't it? So the people who are supposed to represent Yah in the midst of this world is held to that standard first. All right, let's look in Acts 5. But a certain man named Ananias with Sapphira, his wife, sold a possession and kept back part of the price, his wife also being privy to it, and brought a certain part and laid it at the apostles' feet. But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Ghost and to keep back part of the price of the land? While it remained, was it not your own? And after it was sold, was it not your own? Why have you conceived this thing in your heart and lied unto men, but unto God? Lied not to men, but to God. And Ananias, hearing these words, fell down and gave up the ghost, and great fear came all them that heard these things. Keep reading, verse 6. And the young men arose, wound him up, and carried him out and buried him. And it was about the space of 3 hours later when his wife, not knowing what was done, came in. And Peter answered to her, tell me whether you sold the land for so much. And she said, yes, for so much. And Peter says, how is it that you have agreed together to tempt the Spirit of the Lord? Behold, the feet of them which have buried your husband are at the door, and they shall carry you out. Then fell she down straightway at his feet and yielded up the ghost. And the young men came in, and they found her dead. They carried her forth and buried her by her husband. Can you imagine? Now, the thing is, Ananias and Sapphira, they sold property that was theirs. They sold land that was theirs. Did God tell them to do it? No, we don't have a record of that. Did God tell them how much they were supposed to give of it? No, we don't have a record of that. What we find is that they came to a decision that they were going to sell property and give the proceeds, right? And they were going to say this is what they were giving. We don't know exactly how much. It's just kind of like, let's say they were going to give the whole thing, or if you want to, just throw numbers in there. It doesn't say specifically, but just for the sake of argument, let's say we're going to give 100% of the proceeds, but they sold the land, they got it, and then they were like, we could keep back 25% of this and live pretty nice off of it and still give the majority, and we'll still be seen as good people. There's something in there, isn't there? So what happened, they came in and he said, is this what you sold the land for? You sold the land, you sold your possession. Yes. And this is how much you got for it. Yes. He lied. He lied. And the thing of that was death. So the funny thing about this is that the youth group had to go out and bury him. It says the young men, right? We don't know how old. So they go, they take him out, they carry him out, and they bury him. About 3 hours later, wife comes in, and then she falls dead just as the men who buried her husband walk into the door, and is like, really? Again? Another one? Kind of thing. And they grabbed her and went out and buried next to their husband, right? So the point of all this being, it was their possession. They could have done whatever they wanted with it, but they lied about it. Again, they approached Yah with an offering and was being misleading about it. Okay, so there's a lot to be said there. So they brought an offering that Yahweh did not ask for. They lied about the amount. The pride did them in, and they had to look good in front of the pastor in the assembly, right? Of course, they had to look good in front of the people. Well, is this what Aaron and his sons did? No, I don't think so, but the example still stands because they approached Yahweh with an offering and they did it the wrong way. They did it as a way they shouldn't have, right? Look at this. As a result of what happened to Aaron's sons, there's another order given to the Levites. Leviticus 10, verse 10. It says, you will distinguish between the holy and the common, and between the unclean and the clean. And, verse 11, this is not just for the Levites. Look at verse 11. And so you will teach the people of Israel all the laws that Adonai has told them through Moshe. So what happens if we don't teach the differences between clean and holy common? Well, first off, we won't know the difference. If we do not teach the clean, unclean, holy, and common, we won't know the difference between them. Does that really matter? Yeah, it really does. Because as a people redeemed, we need to walk as people who have been redeemed, who have been called clean, who have been called holy. We need to learn how to do that. Okay? So that matters, maybe not to the people around us, but it matters to Yah. And so we have to be careful with how we live and how we do these things, right? Okay. So how do you know what's clean and unclean? Well, as far as kosher goes, the animals are the creatures for themselves. They have a purpose. They're not bad. They're just considered not food for human consumption. Okay. There's this thing in here that says, like before we really get into this, I want to make the point very clear. This is just the teaching of what Yahweh is telling us as a people who are called out and redeemed, as a holy people. This is what he desires for us. There's a lot of people that don't know this, though, because they have not been taught or instructed in the ways of clean, unclean, or holy, common. And because of that, there's a lot of things that just people don't know, people don't understand. This in no way, shape, or form is supposed to be used as a teaching to try to grab someone and bash over the head who may not have looked at this or may not know this or may not understand it. But this is to try to help bring some understanding in relationship to this, because God said that it does have an impact on your approach with him. Okay. So, how do you talk about this? It's like, so is a pig an abomination? No, but eating one, it was not supposed to be eating one. See, this is the point I'm getting at. Yah created all the animals of the earth, all the creatures. They have a purpose. He has a plan for that. It's given in the way the earth is made, in the ecosystem, the way everything's done. Everything has a purpose that is there. Okay? Just some things were considered safe or able for consumption, and some things were not. Right? So those are the things that we were looking at. So in relationship to the animals, there are two rules or two witnesses. One was completely split hoofs and chew its cud. It must ruminate. For fish, two rules, fins and scales. I mean, that's not hard, is it? For the animals, completely split hoof and chew its cud. It must ruminate. Well, I mean, a cow is like that, So fish, fins and scales. You can look at a fish and tell if it has fins and scales. So again, it's not that difficult. All right. For birds, the non-kosher birds are named, right? So for birds, he names the non-kosher birds. So again, and I know, it says a bat, but a bat's not a bird. I agree, a bat's not a bird. It's more like flying creatures, kind of a thing. But again, they're named. The ones that are not kosher are named. Okay. What about insects? You can eat insects. Well, some, yeah. Say if they're flying or teeming and they walk on four legs and they have jumping legs, like crickets, grasshoppers, locusts. It's actually a good sense of protein for, if you like pound for pound, it's a good sense of protein for those. Okay. I can't say they're something I necessarily enjoy, but it's there and you can eat them. All right. So I think the question of this is, okay, but in relationship to kosher and things like that, is it still really relevant for us today? Yes, I do believe so. But what if I'm not Jewish? I do believe they still exist, because this is for all those whom Yah has called out and redeemed and set apart as his people. Okay? If he says you're supposed to be a holy people, then we need to pay attention to what he says constitutes being a holy people. Now notice, I'm not saying making yourself more holy. I'm saying being holy. All right? So does it still matter? Well, look at this. Isaiah 52:11 says, "Depart, ye depart, go out from here, touch no unclean thing, go out of their midst, be clean, you who bear the vessels of the Lord." And you can say, well, that's just from Isaiah. That's an Old Testament thing, right? But 2 Corinthians 6:17, Rav Shaul, the Apostle Paul says, "Therefore go out from their midst, be separate from them, says the Lord. Do not touch the unclean thing, and I will welcome you." Again, if it doesn't matter what's considered unclean, why would Shaul even bother quoting from Isaiah? Why would he even mess with it in the first place if a state of unclean or touching unclean things was no problem or it didn't matter, why would he mention it? Why would he say, don't touch the unclean things? Okay, so again, these are things we do need to look at. 1 Thessalonians 4:7, for God has not called us unto what? Uncleanness, but unto holiness. Ephesians 5:5 and 6, for this you know that no whoremonger, nor unclean person, nor covetous man who is an idolater has any inheritance in the kingdom of the Messiah and of God. Let no man deceive you with vain words, for because of these things comes the wrath of God upon the children of disobedience. What about the New Jerusalem? Revelation 21:27 says, and there shall be in no wise enter into anything unclean, or he that makes an abomination and a lie, but only they that are written in the Lamb's book of life. So again, no unclean thing will enter into the New Jerusalem. So it doesn't matter what is unclean. Again, like other things that we've looked at in Scripture, if it mattered back then, and it matters in the time that's yet to be, shouldn't it matter now? It's not like God changed his mind and then changed it again, kind of a thing, right? So does it matter? Yes, it matters. And another thing we see about this in the Torah, you can say, what's the heart of the matter, the heart of the thing? Well, in the Torah, Leviticus is the central book. Okay, the main theme of that whole book is holiness, to be a holy people. And at the very center, at the very heart of the Torah is something that tells us about that as well. All right, so let's take a look at it. The center of the Torah, if you counted by letters, is Leviticus 11:42. Whatever moves on its stomach, goes on all fours, or has many legs, all creatures that swarm on the ground, you are not to eat them because they are a detestable thing. This is also the word that's used here, gahon, the word for stomach. You see it circled there on the screen, the word gahon. It is also used in Genesis 3:14 concerning the serpent crawling on its belly, and this is the only two times the word is used in the Torah. So the very center is that letter Vav that you see the arrow pointed at, that letter Vav. And so the central theme is the stomach or the belly, or that's the idea of it. And again, how does that relate to what Yah is trying to tell us here? Because we need to be careful of the things and how we discern what we allow into our hearts, right? So let's look. Clean and unclean is not always about sin, because unclean is not always sin. Okay, nor is unclean. It's not a guilt or a punishment. It is a ritual state of being. Like if you brought an offering, you had to be clean. To be unclean was not a sin, but was a defilement. Now, to be clear, all sin is unclean, but not all unclean is sin. All right, like here's an example. If you touched a dead body, you would be considered unclean. Did you sin in touching the body? No, but you would be considered unclean. Then there was a process of time you would have to wait to be considered clean again. All right, so again, as a people of Yah, he wants us to remain in a state of clean. So however, if you were defiled and you went into the presence of Yahweh, what would happen? You would die. And all the more reason why we need the Korban, which we say we are in Yeshua. Again, the whole sacrificial system was a means of drawing near, was a means of approaching a holy God and learning how to approach him and to be represented before him. So again, we need a Korban, right? All right. So now we are told this, that we need to discern ourselves and our surroundings. In order to do that, we are told about what is clean and unclean in regards to the things that we eat, the things we allow within us. We are taught how to biblically discern by learning how to discern and make distinctions in the natural. Remember here, food is a clean, unclean issue. Okay, the issue here is clean, unclean. All right, and these are things that we need to remember. Okay. So the purpose of discerning the clean and the unclean and the holy in common is so that we will not become defiled. That is the purpose of learning to discern. It's kind of like when we just came through Pesach recently, then we had the days of unleavened bread. Well, before you went into Passover, you had to get the leaven out of your house, which meant you had to go through everything and look at everything to try to discern if there was leaven in these things. God was trying to teach us a very spiritual thing from a very physical way. Because sometimes we need examples. He can just tell us something, but then it remains abstract. But if he says, this is how I want you to do something, and it's a very physical thing, then we can learn very spiritual ideas and concepts in a very physical way, and it'll help us get it sometimes, okay? Remember the issue. The real issue is defiling ourselves, then coming into the presence of Yahweh. Leviticus 15:31 says, in this way, you will separate the people of Israel from their uncleanness. Why? So that they will not die in a state of their uncleanness. Why? For defiling the tabernacle, which is there in the midst of them. So the idea here, if the people could die for defiling the tabernacle, die for bringing defilement or uncleanness into the tabernacle, how much more if we can say, but don't you know that you are the tabernacle? Oh. See, it's not like, well, don't you know that you are a temple? Don't you know that you are the tabernacle? So this is irrelevant. No, it actually holds more weight. Don't you know that because you are the tabernacle, because you are the temple, you are not to bring the uncleanness or the things that defile into you or near you? Because you do not carry unclean things into the presence of the holy God. So, if we are a place for his presence to dwell, should we not abstain from the unclean things? All right, moving on. 2 Corinthians 6:16. What agreement can there be between the temple of God and idols? For we are the temple of the living God, as God has said, I will house myself in them, and I will walk among you. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Therefore, Adonai says, go out from their midst, separate yourselves, don't even touch what is unclean, and I myself will receive you. Like I said, that's quoting from Isaiah 52. 1 Peter 1:14-16. As a people who obey God, do not let yourselves be shaped by the evil desires you used to have when you were still ignorant. On the contrary, following the Holy One who called you, become holy yourselves in what? Your entire way of life. Since the Tanakh says, you are to be holy because I am holy. So Leviticus 11:45 says, I am Adonai who brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Therefore, you are to be holy because I am holy. Leviticus 19:2 says, speak to the entire community of Israel and tell them, you people are to be holy because I, Adonai, your God, am holy. The question here is who gets to define holy, and do we have the right to follow our own way as a holy people? If he says, be holy because I am holy, then that's what he's saying. He says that he has made us holy, and it's not like we can make ourselves holy, but he desires for us to stay that way. So he says, I have called you holy, and this is what you're expected as a holy people. Do not bring defilement into yourself. All right. Isaiah 65, 1-7. Again, in relationship to this, we try to draw things. We just try to make everything abstract or try to make everything just spiritualize things. But remember, God is trying to teach us spiritual things in a physical way. Because sometimes there are things that bring defilement that can keep us from his presence. And if we're so caught up in, well, it doesn't matter what God says because it was all a metaphor, are we really approaching him as holy? Are we really listening to what he says? Because there are some things that he talks about, that you don't bring uncleanness into his presence. You don't bring unclean to the tabernacle because that brings defilement, and that was the death penalty, guys. So there's a lot to be said there, okay? What does Isaiah have to say about issues like this? It's like, well, we're spiritual people, so we can do whatever we want, live however we want, eat whatever we want, do whatever and it doesn't matter. Well, God knows my heart. I can do whatever I want. So much to say about that, God gave you your heart, your emotions, your will, all of that, and they need to be used to honor him, but he gave it to you, use it. But he never says follow your heart. He says the heart can lead you astray. It can be wicked and deceitful. And even the relationship with Ezekiel, he says we wear them so to tell us to keep God's ways, to walk in his word. Don't go following after the own things that we see and desire and chasing after our own things, right? Okay, let's look at what Isaiah's got to say. Isaiah 65, 1 through 7 says, "So I was ready to be sought by those who did not ask for me. I was ready to be found by those who did not seek me. I said, here I am, to a nation that was not called by my name. I spread out my hands all day to a rebellious people," look at this, "who walk in the way that is not good, following their own devices, a people who provoke me to my face continually." How? Sacrificing in gardens, making offerings on bricks. Remember, like all the kings had gardens. It wasn't just because they liked them to look pretty. They had pagan rituals in the gardens. They did pagan worship in their gardens. That's why they all had the gardens. That's why they all had these things, right? This is also why God says you're not to build an altar next to a tree, because again, these were rituals and things that were done at the time, right? So it's talking about people who are calling themselves holy, but they're going into these gardens making sacrifices and offerings, which means they're saying they're holy, they're set apart, but they're doing things regarding idolatry. Verse 3, "A people who provoke me to my face continually, sacrificing in gardens, making offerings on bricks, who sit in tombs and spend the night in secret places, who eat pig's flesh and broth with tainted meat is in their vessels, who say, keep to yourself, do not come near me, because I am too holy for you. These are a smoke in my nostrils, a fire that burns all the day. Behold, it is written before me. I will not keep silent, but I will repay. I will repay into their lap. Both your iniquities and your father's iniquities together, says Yahweh, because they made offerings on the mountains and insulted me on the hills, and I will measure into their lap payment for their former deeds." God is saying we can't just do whatever we want if we say we're his people. We can't say we're a holy people and then just go and worship however we desire to do so, and doing things that the other nations did for their gods. We can't do that, right? Going on, taking another look back at Isaiah 66, 15. "See, Yahweh is coming with fire, and his swift chariots roar like a whirlwind. He will bring punishment with the fury of his anger and the flaming fire of his hot rebuke. Yahweh will punish the world by fire and by his sword. He will judge the earth, and many will be killed by him. Those who consecrate and purify themselves in a sacred garden with its idol in the center, feasting on pork and rats and other detestable meats, will come to a terrible end, says Yahweh." So again, if we're supposed to be a people set apart, we're not to do the things the nations do. Okay, we're not to worship Yah in these ways or in these manners, because he said there are things that we can do that bring defilement, abomination, detestable things to ourselves, right? As an interesting side note, God tells the first man not to eat of the fruit of one tree. The nature of the tree is irrelevant. What matters is its symbolic function. It represents the fact that creation has boundaries, the most important being the boundary between the permitted and the forbidden. That was Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. So what he's saying is that the very first thing, here we have in the very beginning, Yah said a commandment regarding what you eat. You can eat of all these other trees bearing fruit, all these other things, but that one tree right there, don't eat from the fruit of that tree. And what do? Man, we do. God says, don't do that. I don't want you to have that. We start pitching a fit. We throw a tantrum. Why can't I have that? Other people are having that. I want that. That looks good. That looks like something I want. I want that. And God said, I don't want you to have that. But, of course, that's where we go, right? There's a reason for this. Okay, from the very beginning, Yah is saying he is God of us completely. He is God of our lives and how we conduct our lives. And we need to be careful as a holy people, right? Leviticus 11:44. "For I am Yahweh your God." Guys, that's enough right there. I am Yahweh your God. Does he really need more than that? I mean, if he says, this is what I desire for you because I am Yahweh your God, can we really truly look at him and say, well, that's not enough. That's not good enough for me. I need a better reason. No, we need to be careful. Okay? He says, I am Yahweh your God. Therefore, he follows it with something. So he's reminding us, if he is our God, if he is the one that we serve, then what comes after that is relevant for our life. All right. So I am Yahweh your God. You shall therefore sanctify yourselves, and you shall be holy, for I am holy. Neither shall you defile yourselves with any manner of creeping thing that creeps on the earth. For I am Yahweh that brings you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. This is the law of the beasts and of the fowl and of every living creature that moves on the waters, and of every creature that creeps on the earth, to make a difference between the unclean and the clean, and between the beast that may be eaten and the beast that may not be eaten. Let's go down to Leviticus 20, verse 24. But I have said to you, you shall inherit their land, and I will give it to you to possess it, in a land that flows with milk and honey. I am Yahweh your God, and I have separated you from the other people. You shall therefore put a difference between clean beasts and unclean, and between unclean fowls and clean, and you shall not make your souls abominable by beast or by fowl or by any manner of living thing that creeps on the ground, which I have separated from you as unclean. And you shall be holy unto me, for I, Yahweh, am holy, and I have severed you from the other people, that you should be mine. Yahweh is saying, because we are his, he sets us apart. Because we are his, he wants us to make distinctions between what is holy and what is common, between what is unclean and what is clean. And just because something is common, again, doesn't mean that it's evil. You know, unholy is not always bad, okay? Unholy just means not holy, all right? Here's a good example of that. If they brought an offering, the utensils that were used to put the meat on the altar was holy. If they did a barbecue at home, their barbecue tongs were not holy. See, like I said, we hear words and phrases and we automatically go to like big things with it, and it doesn't always mean like that, okay? So again, there are boundaries that Yahweh desires for us to live within. There are boundaries and things we're looking at. The principle of holiness is the maintenance of boundaries. And again, that's in relationship to what Yahweh has given the priesthood to walk in and to teach the people of Yah. All right. So back to this vav in the word gachon, right, that we're looking at in relationship to the belly. So this is a mark made by the scribes. The vav was elongated. On either side of this letter, vav is an equal number of letters making up the Torah. The elongated vav is in the word for belly. It is the belly of the Torah, if you will. It is also the part of the Torah that teaches about holiness and that we are not to bring near to our souls. In other words, we're not to defile ourselves by bringing something unclean close. So the soul's in the torso of the belly of the person in the way it's generally taught. There are three appetites that are given to every man. Ego, which is the passion for life, the appetite for food, and the appetite for sex. The Torah teaches us there are limits on those appetites and restricts those things that profane our souls and that keep us from being holy. It is the basis for the letter to the Gentiles in Acts 15. The letter is a shortened teaching on the middle portions of the Torah. In other words, the heart of the Torah, or relationship to holiness, or the holy things. The things that we allow to come near to us, the things that we allow within us and as a part of our lives. All right. This was the relationship to the letter in Acts 15. Remember, there were people from the nations who wanted to serve the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov. They wanted to serve the God of Israel. They knew that he is the one true God, but they didn't know how to do it. And so they're still doing the same things that they were doing before, eating the same things they were doing before, living the same way, possibly worshiping the same way, doing all these things. So they needed to learn how to live the way that Yah had established. I mean, it's kind of like this. When Yahweh brought them out of Egypt, he had to bring them to the mountain to teach them what he desired. You know, he redeems us. Then we need to get into the word to find out how to walk in his ways. If we say we want to walk with him, we need to learn what that looks like, right? So that was the issue in Acts 15 council. The question was, what do we tell all these Gentiles who are coming to the faith in relationship to like circumcision? Which would mean, and back in the day to say, oh, they have to be circumcised. It's not just a matter of the cutting of the skin. It wasn't happening here. What they were saying is to be redeemed, to be born again, to be a people of God, they have to convert to Judaism. That is what was being said. That's what was being propagated. Two things, actually. They have to convert to Judaism, and they need to keep the Torah. Now, interestingly, both of these things were addressed, but you may not have seen it at first look or at first glance. They said in relationship to the circumcision, they do not need to convert to Judaism to serve God. But does that mean that the Torah is not relevant? They don't say that. They say actually the contrary. All right? So let's take a look at this. Acts 15, if you go to verse 1, it says, "But some men came down from Yehuda to Antioch, and they began teaching the brothers that you can't be saved unless you undergo the Brit Milah prescribed by Moshe." Again, this was, you cannot be saved unless you're circumcised. Okay. But all they're saying is it's the ceremony of cutting the foreskin of the flesh, right? No, because in order to be circumcised, you had to convert to Judaism, then they would circumcise you. It's not a matter of based on your profession of faith, they would circumcise you. See what I mean? There's a difference there. In order to be circumcised, you have to be a Jew. This is what they were propagating. And so you need to convert to be a Jew, then we can circumcise you, then you keep the Torah, and that's how you're born again. No, guys, it wasn't a conversion to Judaism that saved you. It wasn't a conversion to that is what did it. It was, again, a profession of faith. I mean, Abraham was not a Jew. Abraham from the very beginning, I mean, Jew did not exist until Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons. The fourth one was Judah. So the tribe of Judah didn't exist until Judah started having kids. So again, it is all about being a people set aside as a people together called Israel. The descendants of Abraham. This is who Yah had a covenant set aside and established for. All right, moving on. Verse 5. "But some of those who had come to trust were from the party of the Pershim, the Pharisees, and they stood up and said, 'It is necessary to circumcise them and direct them to observe the Torah of Moshe.'" So what did they say regarding this? So do they need to convert to Judaism to be born again? Do they need to keep the Torah to be saved? Or do they need to keep the Torah as a means of walking out their salvation? Let's say sanctification, their daily life. All right, so James stands up. James makes a ruling. Acts 15:19, "Therefore, it is my opinion that we should not put obstacles in the way of the Goyim who are turning to God. Instead, we should write a letter to them telling them," look at this, what is it? "To abstain from things polluted by idols," which is defilement, "from fornication," which is sexual immorality, "from what is strangled," guess what, guys? That's an issue of kosher, "and from blood." That is another aspect of kosher. You don't eat the blood. But also, what was the purpose of the blood? The blood was given to make atonement on the altar. And then verse 21, "For from the earliest times, Moshe has in every city those who proclaim him, with his words being read in the synagogue every Shabbat." So what's being said here? Go to the synagogue on Shabbat to hear the Torah taught. Both issues were addressed. A conversion to a religious system is not salvation, but you keep the Torah as you learn what it says. So these four things that were given: stay away from idolatry. Stay away from things strangled, from blood. Stay away from idolatry. Learn what kosher has to say. Keep these things. And then go to the synagogue on Shabbat weekly to hear the Torah taught. Because that's where you go to hear that. To hear how you are to live your life, how things are to be given, how things are proper for you. What is a path of life and blessing? What was Yah's desire? What was his heart? Remember, when Yah spoke, he spoke his Torah to his people. Every person in the nation heard it. And that was his heart being given to his people. Okay? So that is how we need to receive it from a loving God, from a loving Father to his children. Right? All right. So an argument today regarding food is all food is clean. So where do we go to find out what is food and what may be eaten? The thing is, if it is not to be eaten, it is not food. Traditional Christianity has historically rejected the dietary commands shortly after parting from Judaism and was trying to separate from anything Jewish. See, in the beginning, there was a lot of anti-Semitism, okay? We'll call it that. And if it looked Jewish, they didn't want to have anything to do with it, okay? Guys, in the beginning, we say, well, the New Testament church, they met in homes. Don't forget something, guys. They met in homes, they met in the synagogues, and they met at the temple while it stood, all right? So it's not just one place. These were all places, and we had people coming together in faith who were Jewish and who were not Jewish. So after a period of time, there became another religious system, a political system, if you will, and they wanted to distance themselves from anything Jewish or Jew-sounding, okay? Even down to things like the Sabbath, even down things to like the appointed times, the Moedim, all these things that were established, right? So again, in another effort to try to remove that, well, think about food, right? Again, what's said about it? Where do we find the definition of what food is? And did Yeshua at any point in time say that the unclean foods are now considered clean and good for consumption? You can't find that anywhere. Did Peter say it? No. Did Paul say it? No. And I'll show you, hang in with me, okay? I'll show you what they said and what they were meaning, what they were saying. So if the apostles had no concern for the dietary rulings, they would not have had concern for how food was handled. And James had to stay away from things that were strangled. So Peter even said that he had never eaten anything that was considered unclean. Check it out. James says stay away from things that are strangled, which meant they were, I don't want to say concerned or scared or anything like that, but they knew that it was proper to refrain from things that were handled inappropriately. Okay? As well as Peter said he has never eaten anything that was considered unclean. How many meals do you think Peter ate with Yeshua? I mean, it's something to think about, right? So he said he had never eaten anything unclean. So, which meant, even in his eating meals with Yeshua didn't eat anything unclean because, you sit down at a meal and everything's there in front of you, right? Again, keep in mind the point. Leviticus 11:45. I am Yahweh that brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. Leviticus 11:43 through 47, you go back and read that, but verse 46 and 47 says this. So such then is the law concerning animals, flying creatures, all living creatures that move about the water, and all the creatures that swarm in the ground. Look at verse 47. Its purpose is. So what is the purpose for kosher? What is the purpose for defining what animals can and cannot be eaten according to the word? What is the purpose? He says it. What is the purpose? It is to distinguish between the unclean and the clean, and between the creatures that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. So again, we're talking about things that are clean, the things that are unclean, and the things that can be eaten and not be eaten. Why? Because Yah says, I made you clean. Do not defile yourself. Because Yah said, I have set you apart. So these are things that show us how to live and what he considers. All right? So now back to the thing with Peter. What about Peter's vision in Acts chapter 10? Now, I know a lot of you guys already know the answer to this, right? A lot of you guys already know this. But if you already know this, then this is great. Just kind of hang in. This is just kind of a refresher, and we're just kind of talking back and forth here. But if you've never heard this before, think back to the first time you ever heard this, when you've been raised to think contradictory. When you go back and take a look at Scripture and you come to realize that, well, that's not exactly what it said. Think about these things, right? So we're often told Peter's vision, he lowered the sheet of all these things, all these unclean animals, and he says, rise, kill, and eat. And he said, no, I can't do that. And he did it again. He did it again. So he repeated himself, which meant God really wanted him to get up and kill this food and eat it, right? No, that's not what it says. You go back in and you read further, you find out that Peter himself defines the vision, and he does it in Acts 10, and he also does it when he's before the council as well. So in multiple places, it's defined what Peter's vision is, and nowhere does Peter himself say or someone else say that it's in relationship to now we can eat these foods. These animals are now considered food that we can now eat and we can now have. It's not in there anywhere, guys, nowhere. Acts 10:10. So Peter began to feel hungry, and he wanted something to eat, but while they were preparing the meal, he fell into a trance. Okay, think about this for a second, just for a moment. Peter was on the roof, and he was praying. He was meditating. He was praying, and he was starting to feel hungry while they were cooking food, and he kind of fell into a trance kind of state. He was meditating, and he kind of, went into a meditative state, right? He went into a trance, and then God gave him a vision. God ever speak to you where you're at? Does he ever speak to you in language you can understand? Does he ever use something right in front of you to tell you something that you may have missed before? Guys, that's what's happening here with Peter. He was hungry, and so God is saying, oh, okay, you're hungry. Here, eat this. And he's like, I can't touch that. Right? So God was showing him his bias against someone who was not a Jew. And so this is what was being revealed to him. And God is saying, don't call someone that I have cleaned unclean. It doesn't matter if they're a Jew or a Gentile. If I have called them my people, you do not call them unclean. Okay, let's go back to the story. Verse 11. So, and he saw the heaven opened and something that looked like a large sheet being lowered to the ground by its four corners. In it were all kinds of four-footed animals, crawling creatures, and wild birds. And a voice came to him, get up, Kepha, get up, Peter, slaughter and eat. Verse 14, but Kepha said, no, sir, absolutely not. I have never eaten anything that was unclean or trife. And a voice spoke to him the second time, stop treating as unclean what God has made clean. This happened 3 times, and then the sheet was immediately taken back up into heaven. Now, this is what we're told. God says, don't call something unclean that I have cleaned. So God is saying that now these animals, he's made these animals clean now, right? No, that's not what he said. Okay? Because again, Peter was puzzled at this vision. He was perplexed. He didn't know what to think of this because it went against everything that he knew, everything that he was taught. And again, don't you think he would have ate with Yeshua? Don't you think that Yeshua would have been teaching in relationship to these things? Come on. So, what happened? Verse 17, so Kepha was still puzzling over the meaning of the vision he had seen when the men Cornelius had sent, having inquired of Shimon's house, they stood at the gate. Aha. Cornelius was an army soldier, a centurion, and he had a position of honor, but he was a God-fearer. He prayed to God. He gave offerings. He helped. He was a God-fearer, and God wanted to send Peter to him. But Peter saying, he's a Gentile. I can't go into a Gentile's house. Aha. So God was telling him that I have cleaned him. He is cleansed. He is clean. Don't call him unclean. I want to send you to him. Right? So what's going on? Verse 19. So while Peter's mind was still on the vision, the Spirit said, 3 men are looking for you. So get up, go downstairs, and have no misgivings about going with them because I myself have sent them. Think about that. Peter's still pondering, what does all this mean? I can't understand all this. Why would all this happen? And then the Spirit says, there's some men downstairs looking for you. Don't have any misgivings about going with them because I sent them. Why would he have misgivings about going with them if God sent them? Because they were Gentiles. because they were considered, by the Jews, they were considered unclean. Why would they be considered unclean? Because they were pagans. Because they did unclean things. They ate unclean foods and worshipped idols and did all these things. So yeah, they were considered unclean. But these men were not like that. Cornelius was not like that. He feared God, right? All right. So Acts 10:28. So Peter says to them, "You are well aware that for a man who is a Jew to have close association with someone who belongs to another people or to come and visit him is something that just isn't done. But God has shown me not to call any food unclean." Is that what he says? But God has shown me not to call any animal unclean. Then he goes back in the house to eat dinner and then sends the men on their way. No. He says that God has shown me not to call what? Any person. And look what he says, not just unclean, but he says common or unclean. All right. Acts 10:34. So Peter addressed them, "I now understand that God does not play favorites, but that whoever fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him, no matter what people he belongs to." Think about that. God is telling Peter, it doesn't matter what people he belongs to, I'm bringing them in to be my people. And that was what Peter had to learn, right? And that's what Yahweh was teaching him. All right, so why did a Jew not eat with a Gentile? Well, because of the idolatry and the paganism, the unclean, and all that kind of stuff, right? A Jew did not eat with a Gentile. And again, this was not an issue of eating lamb or eating pork. This was an issue of idolatry, and they were not to have fellowship with idolaters or pagan practices. If an unclean person touched permissible food, it became unclean. If food was mishandled, it became common. This was never an issue about whether pork is now kosher or not. What he's saying is, if there is a Gentile who now wants to serve the God of Abraham, the God of Israel, and he doesn't quite know how to do it yet, he's still learning, but he invites you to his home, he invites you to dinner, and he serves you lamb. Is that lamb considered good? Well, we would say, well, yeah, it was lamb, it was considered clean. But here's the thing, if it was a Gentile who prepared the lamb, if it was a Gentile who slaughtered the lamb, a Jew would not eat with them in those days, in those times, because it was considered clean food. It was an animal that was fit for consumption, but because it was mishandled in their mind, it was handled by someone who was unclean, it is now unclean. If someone who was unclean touched something that was clean, it became unclean. Kind of like the issue of the altar. If someone put something unclean on the altar, it would bring defilement on the altar. It was considered unclean. So an unclean brought defilement. That is why a Jew would not eat with a Gentile. So the issue taken with Yeshua, remember that? Eating with unwashed hands. If a man who was unclean touched something that was unclean, everything he touched became unclean. So even if he touched food with unclean hands, it was considered unclean. If it was something that was permissible, but he did not wash his hands, and the issue here that we're going to read is it was not an issue of washing your hands with soap and water and water. This is not the issue. The issue was washing with the appropriate blessing, done the appropriate way, as the tradition is. It's not just like, okay, I've washed my hands, I'm good. If you don't do it according to the way it was done in the tradition, it was like you'd never washed your hands. So it's not about if you're eating dirt, okay? This is not the issue. If they were walking through a field, they pluck a little bit of grain and they eat it. This is kind of what was going on. Where were they supposed to wash their hands, right? So this is what was going on. So let's take a look at that. Mark chapter 7. So the Pershim, the Pharisees, and some of the Torah teachers who had come from Yerushalayim, they gathered together with Yeshua, and they saw that some of his Talmidim ate with ritually unclean hands. Notice that, what that says, ritually unclean hands, that is, without doing the Netilat Yadayim. For the Perishim, and indeed all the Judeans holding fast to the tradition of the elders, do not eat unless they have given their hands a ceremonial washing. Also, when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they have rinsed their hands up to the wrist, and they adhere to many traditions, such as washing cups, pots, and bronze vessels. There's nothing wrong with washing, guys. It's highly recommended, actually. But that wasn't the point. The point was, we can get so caught up in doing the ritual of it that we don't actually pay attention to what's really going on, okay? And the ritual of it in itself was not bad. It's just if we hold that as a commandment and must be done this way, that's a problem, all right? All right. So verse 5. So the Parashim and the Torah teachers asked him, why don't your Talmudim live in accordance with the tradition of the elders, but instead eat with ritually unclean hands? Did he say, now keep everything in context, did he say, why are they eating unclean things? No. He said, why are they eating with ritually unclean hands? Okay, so that was the issue. It was not about an issue of what they were eating. The issue was, why were they not doing the tradition? See, two completely different issues. All right, verse 6. Yeshua said, Yeshayahu, Isaiah, was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites, as it is written, the people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far away from me. Verse 7. Their worship of me is useless because they teach man-made rules as if they were doctrines. You depart from God's command and hold on to human tradition. Indeed, he said to them, you have made a fine art of departing from God's command in order to keep your tradition. So again, it's not the fact that they had a tradition, it's the fact they were teaching the tradition as a command. Again, nothing wrong with washing your hands, but they were saying it had to be done this way with this prayer done like that. Okay, and to say this must be done because this is a command, that's a different issue. Okay, so this was not about food, right? Again, keep it all in context. Mark 7:14. So Yeshua called the people to him, and he said, listen to me, all of you understand this. There is nothing outside a person which by going into him can make him unclean. Rather, it is the things that come out of a person which make a person unclean. Anyone who has ears to hear, let him hear. Verse 17. So when he had left the people, he entered the house. His Talmudim asked him about the parable. So keep in mind, see, this is what we're talking about. Nothing can go into a person to make him unclean. Okay, if Yeshua really propagated that specifically the way that that's given to us, then he would be contradicting what the Torah says. So when his disciples say, explain this to us, what does he say? So let's not try to read words into what Yeshua is saying, and let's hear what he actually says. Again, is the issue about what they are eating or about the ritual that's done there? So what is the definition of food that was here? Was it about something that was unclean called food? No, it was not. It was about food, something that was called food, something that was clean and that was permissible and that was suitable for consumption, being eaten with unwashed hands. All right, back to the text. Mark 7:18. He replies to them, so you too are without understanding? Don't you see that nothing going into the person from outside can make him unclean? For it doesn't go into his heart, but into his stomach, and it passes out into the latrine. And then we have in some translations it says, thus he declared all foods ritually clean. We'll get to that in a minute. Verse 20. So it is what comes out of the person, he went on, that makes him unclean. So side note on verse 19. Because it enters not into his heart, but in the belly, goes out of the jaw, purging all meats, or purging food. All right? So here's the thing. What is the definition of food? Now we know, like in King James, meat doesn't mean like flesh always necessarily. It just means food. Okay, something that was considered food, something that was eaten. All right. So in the text that's given there, what's the words that are used, and what is the definition of it? All right, let's take a look at it. So the word there for food, the word is broma, which means articles allowed or forbidden by Jewish law. Look at that. The definition of the word food is, go back to the Torah to see what it calls food. Isn't that amazing? The definition of food is what the Torah said. Aha. See, it didn't change. It didn't change at all. All right, let's keep going. So 7:21. For from within, out of a person's heart, come forth wicked thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, indecency, envy, slander, arrogance, foolishness. All these wicked things come from within, and they make a person unclean. Okay, what about Paul? Paul talks about eat whatever's put in front of you, right? Well, does that mean if something that was unclean was put in front of you that you're supposed to eat it? Again, it goes back to the definition of what food is. Food is something that was declared good for consumption by Yahweh. And if it was unclean, it was never considered food. We have this idea, if it can be eaten, it's food. That's not the case, guys. If it is permissible to be eaten, it is food. Okay, you can eat things that can kill you. And so just because it can be eaten does not mean it should be eaten. So back to the definition of what food is, we need to let God define that. All right, so what did Paul say? Galatians 2:11-14 says this. So furthermore, when Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him publicly because he was clearly in the wrong. For prior to the arrival of certain people from the community headed by Yaakov, he had been eating with Gentile believers. Check that out. It doesn't just say he'd be eating with Gentiles. He'd be eating with Gentiles of the faith. Okay? Which kind of hints to the idea that they would not have been eating something unclean. That they would have been they were considered still Gentiles, so you would not eat with a Gentile because a Gentile was unclean, and even if he was eating things that were permissible, he touched it, it's unclean. So by you being in proximity will become unclean. That was the issue. So he had been eating with the Gentile believers, but when they came, he withdrew and separated himself because he was afraid of the faction who favored circumcising the Gentile believers. Verse 13. And the other Jewish believers became hypocrites along with them, so that even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not walking the good straight path, keeping in line with the truth of the good news, I said to Peter, right in front of everyone, if you who are a Jew live like a Goy and are not like a Jew, why are you forcing the Goyim to live like Jews? Why would he say this? Why would he say, so if you are a Jew, you're living among the Goyim, the Gentiles, why are you forcing the Gentiles to live like Jews? Why would he say something like that? So again, hinting at the idea of what would they have been eating, would Peter be telling them, guys, go ahead and eat the ham sandwich. It's okay. Is that what he would be telling them? No, it's not. Okay. So again, keeping in the context, it's not and what was Peter scared of? The faction of those who were saying that they needed to convert to Judaism, be circumcised, and then keep the Torah. That whole process. To convert to Judaism was the issue. All right. So again, he was scared of that faction. So was fear a thing with Peter that we've seen before? Yeah, he was scared for his life on many occasions. And some of these religious leaders, prone to responding to situations, little overkill. Yeah. Okay. So let's not be too quick or too harsh to judge Peter on that issue. But what would he have been saying? Right? So remember the issue. It was if eating with the Gentiles made you unclean, because Gentiles were considered unclean and idolaters were considered common, not if you were eating kosher meat or not. That was not the issue. Romans 14. So again, now what are we talking about? How's Peter addressing this a little bit later? Romans 14. Now as for a person whose trust is weak, welcome him, but not to get into arguments over opinions. One person has the trust that will allow him to eat anything, while another has trust it is weak, he eats only vegetables. So is this an issue of you can eat whatever you want, whatever flesh you want, versus I'm vegan? Is this the argument that was going on here? No, not at all. Okay. What he was talking about was buying meat that or partaking of and eating meat that was sacrificed to idols, idolatry, something that was good, but has been translated to something that was common because of idolatry. Now, if you go to the market and you go to, there's a store here and a store there, they both are selling lamb. This one over here is selling it for $15 a pound. This one over here is selling it for $13 a pound. Which one are you going to go to? Okay. Well, but the one selling it at $15 a pound, he is a certified kosher butcher. Now this guy over here that was selling it for 13, he says he slaughters appropriately, but you know, he's a Gentile. I don't know if I can trust him. This is kind of the issue what's going on. Or someone's just a flat out Gentile and they don't know if it was how things were partaken, or if it was offered up to an idol upon sacrifice, you know, upon the slitting its throat, if it was a prayer or something was spoken over it that was dedicating it to a deity at the time. I mean, we don't know that. These things existed, okay? This was a common fact back then. They lived in the midst of idolatry and these kind of things, all right? So this is the issue. So if I go to someone's home and they're serving lamb, do I know if it was offered to an idol or not? Well, probably not, but I don't know. But because I don't know, do I partake? Or because I don't know, do I say, I have no idea, I just can't do it, I just can't. So in either situation, we need to be gracious to that, but that's what was going on here, okay? Back to Daniel. That was even the issue back in Daniel. You know, it's funny because people talk about a Daniel fast. Oh, I want to do a Daniel fast. I only want to eat like vegetables and stuff like that. Do you know why Daniel and them did this? It wasn't because they just wanted to do a fast. It was because they did not want to be partakers in idolatry. All right, and go back and look at it. So Daniel 1:8, Daniel resolved that he would not do what? Defile himself with what? The king's food or wine. Okay, so if it was just an issue of what kind of meat it was, why would wine be in there? Because both could have been offered to an idol. I'll get back to that in a minute. So he would not defile himself with the king's food or wine he drank, so he asked the chief officer to be excused from defiling himself. Daniel 1:12, please try an experiment on your servants. For 10 days, have them give us only vegetables to eat and water to drink. Daniel 1:16, so the guard took away the food and the wine they were supposed to drink, and he gave them vegetables. Why would he say just give us vegetables? Because a vegetable would not have been slaughtered to an idol. Vegetable was safe to eat. A vegetable wouldn't have been put on an altar to a pagan god. You know, so they ate the vegetables. So the king's food was offered to idols. Therefore, it was common or defiled. And the wine, the first of the wine, would be poured out as a drink offering to an idol or a god. Therefore, the whole batch would be considered as offered to an idol. This was the case in the markets in the first century. So again, if the first of the wine was poured out to a pagan deity or pagan god, then the whole barrel or the whole vat or whatever was considered offered up to a pagan deity. Think about first fruits. Guys, we just came through the time of Pesach, first fruit, and unleavened bread. And it says regarding the first fruit, if the first fruit is offered as holy and received as holy, then the entire crop is received and is holy. Well, it holds the other way as well. If the first of this crop is offered to a pagan deity, is offered to an idol, then the rest of it would be considered tainted and offered to an idol. All right? Exodus 34:12 through 15 says, be careful not to make a covenant with the people living in the land where you are going, so that they won't become a snare within your borders. Rather, you are to demolish the altars, smash their standing stones, cut down their sacred poles, because you are not to bow down to any other god, since Adonai, whose very name is jealous, is a jealous God. Verse 15, do not make a covenant with the people living in the land. It will cause you to go astray after their gods and sacrifice to their gods. Then they will invite you to join in eating their sacrifices. It's not just the slaughter of the animal that was given, because like many of the offerings that we see with Israel as well, a good example is the peace offering, guys. They put the animal on the altar, and there were portions of this peace offering you got back and you ate it. You were a partaker in the altar. You were a partaker in what was being given there and what was done there, okay? Same thing with the idolatry, right? So the question was, does Yeshua really care about what we eat, or does it really matter? Well, yeah, I do think so. Let's look at a couple things. Revelation 2:12. To the angel of the community of Pergamum write, here is the message for the one who has the sharp double-edged sword. I know where you are living. There is where the adversary's throne is. You are holding on to my name, and you did not deny trusting me, even at the time when the faithful witness Antipas was put to death in your town, and there where the adversary lives. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you. You have some people who hold to the teaching of Balaam, remember the story of Balaam and Balak. What was it? Who taught Balak to set a trap before the people of Israel so that they would do what? Eat food that had been sacrificed to idols and commit sexual sin. He was saying that what he was holding against the church, what he was holding against right here in Revelation 2, was that there are some who were still teaching the things of Balaam. They were still teaching that it was okay to eat meat sacrificed to idols and to involve yourself in idolatry. And that's not okay, right? We know that's not okay. Okay, let's go on. Revelation 2:18. To the angel of the community of Thyatira write, here is the message from the Son of God, whose eyes are like the fiery flame, whose feet are like burnished brass. I know what you're doing, your love, trust, service, and perseverance, and I know that you are doing more now than before. Verse 20. But I have this against you. You continue to tolerate Isabel, the Isabel woman, the one who claims to be a prophet, but is teaching and deceiving my servants to do what? To commit sexual sin and to eat food that has been sacrificed to idols. To eat things that are still sacrificed to idols. And saying it's okay. Let's go on. 1 Corinthians 10:18. Look at physical Israel. Don't those who eat the sacrifices participate in the altar? That's what we were just talking about before, isn't it, guys? Isn't that what we were just saying? That when you had an offering that was put on the altar and you got portions of that back, you were partaking of the altar, you were partaking of the sacrifices. And then some of the offerings, the Levites or the Kohanim, some of the offerings they received portions of, they were partaking from the portions of the offerings of the gifts. They were partaking of the altar. Verse 19. So what am I saying? That food sacrificed to idols has any significance in itself, or that an idol has significance in itself? No. What I am saying is that the things which the pagans sacrifice, they sacrifice not to God, but to demons. And I don't want you to become sharers of the demons. Again, he says food. So keep in mind the definition of what food was is things that were considered lawful for consumption. Things that were considered appropriate. Things that were considered food. So even at this point, it's not a matter of is it a pig or is it a lamb? It was a matter of it was something that was considered okay, but it was dedicated to an idol. We have this idea that idolatry only sacrificed unclean things, and that's not so. They did make sacrifices of unclean things, but that was not the only things they made offerings of. Okay? That was verse 20, verse 21. You can't drink both a cup of the Lord and a cup of demons. You can't partake in both a meal of the Lord and the meal of demons. Leviticus 21:6 says, they shall be holy to their God and not profane the name of their God, for they offer the Lord's food offerings, the bread of their God. Therefore, they shall be holy. So again, what we're talking about is things that were offered to an idol. Okay? The people of Israel, again, just reconfirming the fact that when the offerings were put on the altar, there were portions that were received back, and so they became sharers in the altar. All right? Romans 14:14. Now let's take another quick look at this. So I know, that is, I have been persuaded by the Lord Yeshua the Messiah, that nothing is, what's it say? Unclean in itself. But if a person considers something unclean, then for him it is unclean. Is this talking about pork? Is this an issue of is it pork or is it lamb? And the answer is no, it's not. Because again, well, don't you say, well, see, the pork was considered unclean and now it's considered clean. Guys, keep in mind, nowhere in the context of any of this has that been said. So what's being talked about? All right, let's go back and look at it. So nothing is unclean in itself or by itself, but if a person considers something unclean, for him it is unclean. The word used here for unclean is the Greek word koinos, which means common, which is shared by all, or literally something that is common. Things that was involved in idolatry would be considered common or unclean. All right? So does that mean remember, something that was clean could be considered unclean if it was put on a pagan altar, or if it was dedicated to a deity other than Yahweh. I mean, so again, something that was clean can be considered unclean if it was mishandled. So the word used there for unclean is akathartos. And keep in mind, the word that was used there is koinos, common. So again, it says nothing is common, nothing is unclean, common in itself. But if a person considers something common, for him it is common. The word used there is common, not unclean. Okay? That makes a difference. Because he says, I know I've been persuaded that nothing is common in itself. But if the person considers it common, for him it is common. Why would he consider it common? Because it was involved in idolatry. Okay? What we don't know, but I suspect, you're serving lamb, but you may have bought it from a guy who was not a certified Jewish kosher kill. You may have bought it from the discount guy around the corner. I don't know that, and I know that the other people in that marketplace, they worship idols. I don't know, so I can't eat that. This is what Paul was addressing. All right, so let's keep going. Romans 14:20. Don't tear down God's work for the sake of food. True enough, all things are clean, but it is wrong for anybody by his eating to cause someone to fall away. So what is good is not to eat meat or drink wine. Look at this. There is no mention in the Torah as wine being unclean or not kosher. So he says what is good is not to eat meat or drink wine or do anything that causes your brother to stumble. Remember, the issue is common or dedicated to idols, dedicated to idolatry. So again, the issue that we're saying here, why would he include wine in there? Because the issue was not about, is it an unclean animal or a clean animal? That was not the issue. The issue was idolatry. Because the first of the wine was poured out, to a pagan god, okay? So again, keep the things in context, all right? 1 Peter 1:15. So on the contrary, following the Holy One who called you, become holy you yourselves in your entire way of life, since the Tanakh says you are to be holy because I am holy. So does Peter say that you are to be holy in some of your things or in your entire way of life? And guys, this hits all of us, doesn't it? Because I think we can all look at areas in our life where we can do better, okay? It's not a matter of doing better to earn anything from God. It's a matter of doing better because we know that it pleases him. We know that it's a path of blessing, and we can trip ourselves up. And why fight against yourself, So we need to continue going towards the goal. 1 Peter 2:5, you also as lively stones, living stones, are built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God by Messiah Yeshua. 1 Peter 2:9, you are a chosen people, the king's Kohanim, a holy nation, a people for God to possess. Why? In order for you to declare the praises of the one who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. So back to Leviticus 11:45, is he our God? Yes. Then here's what fits. I am Yahweh your God, who has redeemed you, who has brought you out of the land of Egypt. That's what he's saying. He has redeemed you to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. So here's the challenge. You've been brought out. You've been redeemed. You've been dedicated to Yahweh. He has made you holy to him. Now we need to learn to walk in his ways. That's the challenge for today. Learn to walk in his ways. Learn to discern the clean, the unclean, the holy, and common, not for the sake of trying to put other people down or the people who don't see it or may not understand, but for the sake of you learning to discern what the Father is trying to do in the midst of you. Can we really look at ourselves and say, we've got a little bit of that attitude that Peter had? We got a little bit of that attitude. Well, my beliefs is the absolute beliefs and everything here. And the people that don't think the same way I think or do the same things I do or do things that I find detestable, there's no way they can be serving the God that I serve. Absolutely no way, because I know these people. There's no way it can be done. And God told Peter, hey, if I've cleansed them, shut your mouth. Go talk to them. Aha. See, we need to have those teachable moments, huh? We need to learn not to call people unclean or common if God says that he has cleansed them. So let's learn to walk together. Let's learn to see past some of those things, not be so quick to be critical of one another or make judgments against each other, but let's learn to have those conversations, to learn to walk together, learn to reason with one another, and start to see each other as different parts of the body that is necessary in these last days. I mean, the whole gathering together of the dry bones things, guys, we're scattered all over the place. We need to learn to come together. Yeshua says, if you don't gather with me, you're scattering. Are we a people that are trying to gather in, or are we a people who are trying to scatter and push against? Let's learn to walk in his ways, and let's learn to invite people to serve the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, and do so because we care, because we love, and because we have a God who has a kingdom here that is established in love and mercy. And if not for that, we wouldn't be here. All right, guys, so it's a lot of information today. I definitely appreciate you guys, you guys who could stick in with me this whole time, this whole way. If it's been a blessing to you, when it's done, you can go and share it from our I think it's on our YouTube account. It may end up on our Vimeo account. So again, I know it's on YouTube, The Ruach Life, all one word. And we look forward to hearing from you guys. Until we can see each other face to face again, or if we haven't met yet, until we can meet. I pray that Yah does keep you and keep you safe, and as we learn to walk in his ways together. Amen. So a blessing for you. Let's do the Aaronic blessing. Numbers chapter 6, verses 24 through 26. Yahweh told Moshe and Aaron that when you bless my children, I will place my name upon them and give them peace. And when you bless them, you shall bless them like this. Yivarechecha Yahweh v'yishmerecha. Ya'er Yahweh panav elecha v'yichunecha. Yasa Yahweh panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you